Okay, here it is, right.
Yes.
That.
Right, let's begin. This is being recorded. Everything seems to be fine. Is requesting you to record this meeting locally, allow recording. Good. So very warm welcome everyone to the second part of the 10th City and the Book International Conference. This time focusing on the relations between Florence and India. I am sure some of you will know that we are doing this in celebration of the recent restoration of the Victorian tomb of Rajaram Chhatrapati of Kolhapur. And I would love for Julia to speak about him in a while as well, a bit. But this tomb, this very beautiful tomb in the Catrine Park in Florence was restored with the help of the Roma people. And it is wonderful how this has been done. The idea of the conference was Julia Bolton's. We were introduced to each other in 2019 via Zoom. She is a fellow companion of the Guild of St. George. Some of you may know this is a charity established by John Ruskin in 1871. We are co-companions of which. And interestingly, John Ruskin was one of three people who Gandhi explicitly enlisted in his autobiography as being his inspirations. John Ruskin. The second part of the conference is in Delhi, being held at Red House. Very appropriately named, I would say, Red House after William Morris's Red House in Bexley Heath, and similarly inspired by Ruskin's writings on architecture, his 7 lamps of architecture in particular. There is quite a lot to say about Julia. She has led quite an interesting life, I feel. As far as the scope of this conference allows us, I would like to say a few things. She is caretaker of the English cemetery in Florence. One. Definitely her work with the Roma people is extraordinary. And thirdly, her father was biographer of Gandhi and also accompanied Gandhi on the historic Salt March. Very, very interesting. And I'm not sure how many people still remain who can claim to that, or who have some first-hand knowledge of the event. So, Julia, would you like to say a few words about how the first part of the conference was in Florence?
Right, yes. In this International City and Book 10 conference, we've concentrated in Florence on the 20-year-old Maharaja's monument in the Cascine, where he was cremated, remembering also Shelley, who wrote the Ode to the West Wind in the Cascine, and who drowned and was cremated at Lerici. We've also visited the Villa Stibad and all its military loot and plunder deriving from India, and on the East India Company personnel and their families buried in Florence's English cemetery. These seen through the lens of John Ruskin, with Mornings in Florence becoming Arjun's Mornings in Delhi and in the Red House. Sir Nicholas Mander had us climb geological and spiritual mountains, blending together conservation, Viole John Ruskin, Dante's Mount Purgatory, and India. Nicholas Haverley, himself with a Parsi father, spoke on Joseph Garrow, the son of an Indian princess, the first translator of Dante's Vita Nova, and the nephew of Sir William Garrow of Garrow's Law. Domenico Savini and Gabriella del Lungo, the one in Italian, the other in English, spoke on Queen Victoria as Empress of India. Rita Severi, though not able to be present, wrote importantly on Oscar Wilde's love of the polychrome bust of the Indian prince, which the superintendents instead have had whitened, and they hadn't realized that they needed to celebrate him as Indian, not as British. We had papers on cemetery conservation and research by Amina Anelli of Florence's Comune, Rosie Llewellyn-Jones of BACSA, that's the British Association of Cemeteries in South Asia, Peter Berman on Edinburgh's cemeteries, and the serendipity of Kana Tomizawa's paper from Japan on obelisks and pyramids in Indian cemeteries transported to English gardens as follies. A further strand which will come to the fore in today's presentations is on women's education in India, discussed by Pritha Chakraborty, very much a project of our Indian prince, who was twice Queen Victoria's guest at Windsor, and also the project of my Anglican community, whose nuns taught for many years in Nainital. As well, we'll be hearing from Nick Peters in Antwerp on Pre-Raphaelites and Spiritualism, from Venice's Carl Foscari, Emma Segno on Ruskin and Frances Alexander on Tuscany and her oral traditions, and Maria Laura Pancini on Tuscan lions and heraldry. We shall end with skilled Roma Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu, whose ancestors came to Europe from India 1,000 years ago, meeting with slavery and the Holocaust. And we will show his conservation work in the Swiss-owned so-called English cemetery with Donatello's Prato pulpit, with his facsimile binding of Dante's Libro del Chiodo. Roma did not restore the Indian princes too. We wanted to do it, but we found that already the Maharaja, the current one, had funded the Comune to do it. So it was done by Italians, just as the original monument was not built by Indians, but by British military persons and so forth. I'm so grateful to all of the participants and to the people who've made this conference possible, the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno and so forth, and the Red House in Delhi, and the companions of the Guild of St. George of John Ruskin. And now we can turn it over to Maria Laura Pancini. Have you been able to access your slides now? Or would you like me to do it?
Yes, I think I saw before the...
If you do share sliding, condividi schermo.
No, not... maybe... I saw it before. Now I see it. Yes, okay.
Have you got it?
Yes.
Good, right.
So, you see it. What do you see?
We see it.
You see it. Also, if I change slide. Or you see the first slide?
Everyone, a bit about Maria Laura before she begins.
If I change slide, you see it, or you see
yes,
all the first? Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. At first, I would like to say thank you for all the organizer, and so Professor Bolton Holloway, so Red House in Delhi, and also Arjun Jain, and all the. For me, it's really a pleasure to present my research here. And so today I will talk about the Florentine Marzocco lion. In particular, I will talk. I will focus on some text regarding the minor 14th century political and civil poetry in the Tuscan area. And I will try to find some similarities between this context and the Indian context. At first, I would like to make some clarification about my textual corpus. because in my PhD, I studied the 14th century minor political and civil Tuscan poetry. So today in my presentation, I will focus on this lyrical genre, but on how is the Marzocco lion represented in this genre. At first, I would like also to make to focus on some what is minor poetry, because according to Eliot, the important difference between minor and major poetry is whether a knowledge of the whole, or at least of a very large part of a poet's okay, I will. Makes one enjoy more because it makes one understand better any one of his poems. So in particular, regarding the Italian 14th century poetry, the major poets are Dante, Petrarca, and Boccaccio. So in my research, I excluded these major poets, and I focused on minor poets. So regarding the Marzocco lion, so the Marzocco is the heraldic lion that is a symbol of Florence, and was apparently the first piece of public secular sculpture commissioned by the Republic of Florence in the late 14th century. So it stood at the heart of the city in the Piazza della Signoria, at the end of the platform attached to the Palazzo Vecchio, called the Ringhiera, from which speakers traditionally harangued the crowd. So this is now lost. And the best known rendition is the Donatello, but the Donatello's statue was placed in the Piazza della Signoria, but now it was moved to the Bargello, and it has been replaced by the copy, so we see to his day. And this term, Marzocco, denotes from the Latin word Marte or Mars, and so the Roman god of war, noted also by Dante, and was a Roman statue, was known as the Roman god of war, and it was carried away by a flood in the Arno in 14th century. So Mars has been Florence's emblem. And the Marzocco was such a powerful symbol of the Florentine Republic that Republican Florentine troops in the siege of Florence were known as Marzoccheschi, so sons of Marzocco. Prisoners, for example, of war from Pisa were forced to kiss it in a sign of submission to Florence. So, for example, live lions were also kept at the commune's expense from the Middle Ages until they were banished, but only in 1771, so only late. After this brief introduction, I will focus on some concrete texts, and I will focus on the Marzocco lion in this text. So the first component is Il Lion di Firenze è migliorato, and we don't know the author of this component, but it was written when Florence obtains Arezzo, and is particular because the author refers to Florence with the symbol of the lion, and all the other cities are represented with their heraldic symbol, heraldic animals. So Arezzo is the cavallo sfrenato, Siena is a she-wolf, Pistoia is a bear, And the lion is the powerful one. So the lion with his legs hits the other animals, so the other cities. And the lion will do a bag with the cutes of the other animals. So borsa dei cuochi, and these authors want to express Florence majesty and Florence power. Then there are other two texts because there are tenzone, so one other that writes to another, and they it's like a talk written in with the accompaniment. So this tenzone is between Antonio Pucci and Franco Sacchetti to Florentine, and the occasion of the accompaniment is also the same. So the obtainment of Arezzo, and they use the same animals, referring to the city.
GSM roaming.
So Volterra is the Veltro, Pisa the Fox, Lucca the Ball, Perugia the Griffin. So here we can see, for example, why these cities are called with the animals. So these animals were the heraldic symbol of these cities. So like the lion is for Florence. And then we go to another component, Fiorenza mia, poi che disfattai, written by another Florentine, Franco Sacchetti. And here the Lion of Florence destroyed the Ubaldini's family. So this component was written when Florence destroyed this family. And there is a word games between lion, leone, mare del leone, Castelleone, and these are so geographical references, so are places. Then we will go to a series of components, the Cantari della Guerra di Pisa, written by Antonio Pucci, another Florentine. And these are a lot of text, very long, but I will focus on only on 3 texts. In particular, here Florence is the lion and Pisa the fox, because this series of components are written for the war between Florence and Pisa. So, and also here there are a lot of natural metaphors. So the lion and the fox. So the fox is tries to betray the lion, but the lion is wise. So, and also power, and he has also power. Another component of this series. Also here, Pisa is always the fox and Florence also the lion. So when the authors want to refer to these cities, is often uses these 2 animals. So we're going to another component, this O Pisa Vituperio delle Genti. Here the authors, Filippo De Bardi, the author remember to Pisa that not even God will save her from the clutches of the Florentine lion. And the lion is really described with his fury and majesty, so with his denti, artigli, possenti, and the lion has the Pisan blood in his clothes, so really a strong metaphor. And che non si cheta perché abbia rossi gli artigli possenti del sangue dei tuoi figli con tanta pietà. Then there is another tenzone between 2 poets. In particular is a tenzone between Pietro dei Patinelli, another from Lucca, and another unknown author from Pisa. These 2 texts was written between between September and October, so when Florence occupies Lucca. So, and there are a lot of similarities between the sonnet, the first sonnet I focused on, Il Leon di Firenze e Migliorato, because the city of Tuscany are also represented with their heraldic animals. So the panther is Lucca, the lion and the she-wolf are together against Pisa the fox. So Florence and Siena are together against Pisa in this component. And then I will, finally, I will go to the Sarnath's capital. So the lion capital of Ashoka is the capital or head of a column erected by the Mauryan emperor Ashoka in Sarnath, so in India, and its crowning feathers are 4 life-sized lions set back to back on a drum-shaped abacus. So the side of the abacus is adorned with wells in relief, and interspersing them 4 animals, a lion, so we can see in the picture, an elephant, a bull, and a galloping horse follow each other from right to left. So erected, this status was erected after Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism. So it commemorated the site of Gautama Buddha's first sermon, some 2 centuries before. And the capital eventually fell to the ground and was buried. So it was excavated by the Archaeological Survey of India. And in the very early years of the 20th century, the column, which had broken before, it became buried. So remains in its original location in Sarnath, protected but on view for visitors. The lion above the lotus, the lion, but the lion capital was in much better condition. So, but it was not undamaged. And in particular, it is displayed not far from the excavation site in Sarnath Museum. This is really a symbol also of the Indian Republic, and it is represented in the 2 rupees and in 1 rupee. And the lions in this capital are really symbol of regality and power. So, but also Buddha's symbol. And in the bottom, this I will also focus on this aspect also later. On the bottom of the capital, there are also other animals. So this lion, the lion is not alone. And then I will try to find some conclusion comparison these 2 aspects. And in particular, I can say that, of course, also in the text I analyzed, and in this capital, the lion is an animal, but also a symbol of majesty, power, but also strongness and also brutality. So we can see in the capital, so this lion are also a little bit, they are going to attack. They have this mouth open, and also in the text I focused on, there was this aspect of the lion that attack the other Tuscan cities. So, but in both of the contexts, the lion is associated with other animals. So the lion is in his natural context. So this this both of representation combine the lion as an animal, so with its natural characteristics, so but also the lion as a metaphor of other. So these two aspects are in the same time together. They live together. And I will also, even if we look so other contexts, for example, if you look in China, the imperial guardians, so are a lot of lions statue, or for example, even if we look at the ancient Greek culture, the Roman culture, the Christian tradition, the Saint Mark and Lion, or also at the child fairy tale, for example, the Lion King, we see that there are also aspects that there are also a recurring aspect. For example, the lion is always strong, powerful. It has also majesty, power, but also some aspect of brutality. It is also dangerous. So I think that there are also recurring aspects in each representation of the lions, of the lion and lions, and I think that we could see. I think that we could see in this I tried to with my a presentation, I tried to make an evidence of these similarities. I would like to say thank you, and these are some biographical references, and thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Maria Laura. And you are studying at the University of Siena, aren't you, Maria Laura?
Yes, now I will interrupt my. So yes, I study at a university for foreigners in Siena,
Right.
but it's only the name. So Università per Stranieri di Siena.
Mm-hmm. Julia, I wanted to say something. You are, yes, wait, you are muted.
So I hope that my English.
You are still muted, Julia. Yes, Maria Laura.
Because I hope that my English was not so terrible.
It was fine.
It was fine. And Maria Laura, your animal for Siena is not the lion, it's the wolf.
Yes.
Yes. And I was fascinated by this because earlier in the Middle Ages, there was a great deal of fascination with the triads in poetry, in Welsh poetry, of the prophecies of Merlin. And all of these get into medieval heraldry, where armored knights who cannot be identified because their faces are covered use the symbols of various, the symbols of animals and plants and so forth, as sort of Aristotelian categories, an alphabet in a sense. And I found your paper fascinating, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you very much.
Are there more comments for Maria Laura?
Maria Laura, I would like to ask, is there any logic to these animals being chosen for particular cities? Is there a reason for Florence adopting the lion as its symbol, and so Siena as Siena the wolf and Pizza the fox? Has that been studied? Is it arbitrary?
I think sometime, yes, there is, for example, Siena chose the fox because the legend of Romolo and Remo, the two sons, the two brother, they were adopted by a she-wolf. And Siena chose this she-wolf because there is a legend that linked Siena origins with these two brothers.
Right.
So for this, regarding Florence, I don't know exactly why Florence. And for the other cities also, sometimes there is motivation. I know exactly the history of Siena, but I don't know exactly for every cities if there is a motivation, but each animal has its characteristic. So sometimes cities also choose an animal for his power or for his strongness, also in the heraldic pictures. We can see, for example, that the panther of Pistoia is standing.
Right. Okay.
Is in position. So and also other animals are represented in a position with expresses so powerful and majesty, and also the animal are chosen only so very powerful animal. For example, not an insect or an animal. So
Maria Laura, what are the three animals that stop Dante from climbing his celestial mountain? Right. It's the lion and the lonzo, the panther, and the wolf.
Yes.
So it's the same triadic heraldic cityness metaphors that are going on, isn't it?
Yes, and are also are also animals right of symbolism.
Yes. Yes.
Thinking it
Right.
very a lot of cultures.
Most cities in Italy have these animals, heraldic animals associated with them.
How many? No.
Tuscany, yes.
Yeah.
Tuscany. I think the ancient city.
And Rome with the wolf. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of ancient city, medieval city, has an animal, heraldic animal. For example, Pisa, also the fox, or also Pisa is also associated with
the hare.
The lepre.
Yes, the hare.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Elizabeth Barrett Browning puts that into her poetry too, describing the procession going to the Grand Duke in the Victorian times. And they each had their banners, and she puts them beautifully into the poetry. So it was a continuum. It's still being used today. Right, shall we go on next to?
Yes, we do go on to Pritha Chakraborty, who is a master's student of English literature at the University of Delhi. And she is going to be presenting a paper on masculinization of the motherland, right? Very important, this topic. And she is going to be using as her primary text, I understand, Rabrindanath Tagore, the poet Rabrindanath Tagore's Home and the World. And she is going to be looking at this with the critical eye of the ecologist Vandana Shiva. Rita? Yes.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to say that I feel blessed to be a part of this conference. Thank you so much for the organizing, to the organizing team. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so the title of my paper is Masculinization of the Motherland, Analyzing Rabindranath Tagore's The Home and the World Through an Ecofeminist Lens. Now, Rabindranath Tagore doesn't need an added introduction, but still, he is the finest Nobel laureate, one of the first non-European to receive Nobel Prize. And he is a versatile figure, poet, composer, literature, and he is multi-talented. And his work, Home and the World, specifically deals with a time when Bengal was facing a kind of turbulent violence in 1905. And my my paper focuses on the angle that how, during that time, how the transformation has taken place from the previous centuries to this century, and how it has been shown that the state has been taken over by male nationalistic fanatics, and how the the state has changed from motherland to the concept of fatherland. So I would like to begin with my paper. The paper aims to deal with the concept of motherland as perceived in the text of Tagore's The Home and the World. It aims to scrutinize the concept of home and the world and how it directly impacts the women of the nation. It aims to bring out the hypocritical ideologies of the nationalists in the wake of India's freedom struggle movement, and shows how 19th century Bengal saw the emergence of fanatic nationalists who created an image of the nation as a motherland and inscribed the name Bharat Mata associated with the landmass. Ironically, it was this motherland that was systematically eroded on the basis of religious bigotry, communalism, and fanatic cry of the nationalists who worked with the policy of inclusion and exclusion of the members of the nation. The criteria for belonging to a nation were based on cultural assimilation, common tradition, language, and so on. In India, the concept of nationalism was built on Vedic civilization, which claimed that India is a nation for Hindus and by Hindus. It is this systematic exclusion of certain members of society from the nation building process that is questioned and reinterrogated. On the one hand, women were given the status of goddess and Shakti, and on the other hand, it was this Shakti that was infringed and violated in the hands of masculine power of the state who wanted the nation to be built as per their own ideology. Using Vandana Shiva's concept of masculinization of motherland, it aims to show how the nation was shifting to fatherland from the so-called idolized mother worship of the nation, as all the powers of the nation building process were laid in the hands of the fanatic men who attempted to defend motherland's honor. The paper shows Bimola, the female protagonist of the novel, torn between the ideologies of 19th century Bhadra Mahila or gentlewomen concept and the association of her womanhood with Mother India. 19th century Bengal was in the process of enlightening their women with Western education, and by the middle of the century, Indian nationalism began to feel a sense of superiority among their women and wanted them to withdraw from the world and bring their entire attention to their household. In a similar context, Kundamala Devi had advised women, if you have acquired real knowledge, then give no place in your heart to main sahib-like behavior. This is not becoming in a Bengali housewife. See how an educated woman can do housework thoughtfully and systematically in a way unknown to an ignorant, uneducated woman. And see how if God had not appointed us to this place in the home, how unhappy a place the world would be. A similar idea was rooted in Bimola's ideology. Her ideology of womanhood was associated with female virtues. She considered the duties towards her husband Nikhil as her sole motive of life and worshipped him. She comments that when she would take the dust of her husband's feet without waking him, at such moments she would feel the vermilion mark upon her forehead shining out like morning star. This shows her as directly attached to the concept of homely women. However, later in the novel, the emergence of Sandeep as a nationalist leader intrigues Bimola. His enthusiastic words on claiming the nation from the clutches of Western power motivate Bimola to side with him. Further, his tagging of her as Queen Bee and Mother Goddess become problematized in the concept of nationhood. Bimola is easily awestruck at the charismatic voice of freedom that Sandeep aims to achieve in the name of Swadeshi. He claims, you are the queen bee of our hive, and we, the workers, shall rally around you. You shall be our center, our inspiration. Bimola gets enchanted by the notion of freedom, which not only concerns her land, but her own self. Her door to freedom was opened by his husband himself and wanted her to open her mind and seek her own individuality. Sandeep, with his poetical oration, translates the politics of Swadeshi into her being and builds a pedestal of her, linking her with the image of divine Shakti around whom the world would revolve. He symbolically relates the emerging land with the power of Shakti and hails the nation as Vande Mataram. However, Hail Mother becomes a multi-layered phrase for him to entrap Bimola in the pseudo-freedom struggle of the nation. the nationalist struggle for freedom becomes a male endeavor, where, in the words of Vandana Shiva, a politics of exclusion and violence is built in the name of nationalism. Masculinization of motherland thus involves the elimination of all association of strength with the feminine and with diversity. In the nationalist discourse, like the women of the time, the land is perceived as the other, which needed protection from her virile sons. Such protection is provided by masculine figures through the medium of violence and armed conflict. Tagore saw nationalism as the brainchild of the West, which was organized by some self-interested agendas of fanatic people who wanted to exploit all other communities for their own selfish gains. Shiva notes, Hindutva, it is being repeatedly stated, is the ideology of a modernizing India. Yet, as they are unfolding, liberalization and modernization are based on breaking all the links with the motherland. Masculinization of motherland results in the disappearance of the motherland from the hearts and minds of the people. The novel clearly seems to portray the nation as an object that needs to be looted and snatched and won by force. Sandeep is the embodiment of such violence, where the nation becomes a mere thing to be plundered to attain its freedom, which is in sheer contrast to the ideology of his friend Nikhil, who believes in an all-inclusive nation which is not divided or violated on the basis of aggressive nationalism. As he claims, use force, but for what? Can force prevail over truth? Nikhil's honesty and idealism are contrasted with Sandeep's cunning and flagrant narcissism. As per his Machiavellian ideology, there is no time for nice scruples. We must be unreasonably brutal. We must sin. Nation, therefore, becomes an embodiment of a woman who is overpowered by masculinity and is snatched of her idle womanhood by leading her towards the path of infidelity. Paola Bacheta, in this context, notes that for two of India's spiritual leaders, Ramakrishna and Aurobindo, mother as a symbol of country was charged with love for all their children in all its diversity. However, Hindutva Bharat Mata had to be rescued by her virile sons, who used means of deceit, illegal means, and further the concept of colonialism in achieving their end. Sandeep is so atrocious and greedy in accumulating material wealth in the name of building up a nation that he does not hesitate to encourage his own friend's wife to rob her own husband for the sake of the benefit of the nation. Tagore, in this context, termed nation building as the biggest evil to the civilization, since it is based on power dynamics and coercion that merely focuses on amassing wealth and manifesting terror or innocent individual of the nation. 19th century India was based on hegemonic masculinity, where men's honor was significantly related to their proof of hegemonic masculinity. This includes maintaining their chivalry and honor by limiting the boundary between the women and the nation and enabling them to function as per the instruction manual of the men and powerful politics revolving around them. Peterson notes, motherland is a woman's body and as such is ever in danger of violation by foreign males. To defend her frontiers and her honor requires relentless vigilance and the sacrifice of countless citizen warriors. In this context, it can be noted that Sandeep's approach and his false oratory speeches in order to instigate Bimala towards violating her own home stands in paradoxical contrast to the motive of freeing the country from the clutches of nationalism. Benedict Anderson notes that nation is an imagined community. It clearly advocates the fact that a nation subscribing entirely to dominant ideologies and beliefs and sustaining the fact that a nation and sustaining the system of inclusion and exclusion is bound to be an imaginary endeavor, and nothing concrete is expected to be drawn out of it. Sandeep's cry of nationalism remains a void cry, devoid of devotion and based solely on personal gains. His theory of boycott of foreign goods and forcing innocent village people to give up their trade was a source of outrageous violence in the name of freeing the country from the foreign rule. His concept of nationalism was pretentious and became harmful to the Hindus and Muslims of the nation. He had provoked the youths of Nikhil's village to impose violence against the poor, innocent neighbors so that they are terrorized into accepting his own concept of nation. As noted by Leonard A. Gordon, the Indian nationalist movement, as it developed in Bengal during the last quarter of the 19th century, was dominated by high caste Hindus. But the Muslims in Bengal lagged behind the Hindus in education, the profession, and the government services. Most of the Muslims were lower class cultivators in the eastern districts of Bengal proper. Whereas for Nikhilesh, the idea of Swadeshi involved the inclusion of all the communities of the nation, Sandeep's religious-centric idea and further exclusion of a nation section of people from joining hands in freeing the motherland served as a failure of the nationalistic project. Anita Desai in this context points out that Sandeep resembles nothing so much as the conventional blackguard of Indian stage of Bombay cinema, stroking his handlebar moustache as he gloats over a bag of gold and covering maiden. Bimola's body thus stands as a site of war and a possession to be looted and plundered in the name of saving the nation. Claiming her through false oratory speeches acts as a means of exploitation of the gender. Representation of her as mother goddess makes her think that it is a duty to protect the nation's honor. The eroticization of nation with regards to women's body not only place them within the idea of national, but also make them the bearers of cultures and therefore more vulnerable to violence. Their inclusion in the conflict serves as a means of influencing the future generation and involving them in the fanatic cry for the liberation of the nation. Mrinalini Saha mentions that women are burdened to balance the in-betweenness of pre-colonial tradition and post-colonial modernity. They are expected to seek modernity in the guile of tradition, where she acts as the upholder and preserver of culture. Bimala is seen to be the keen upholder of this tradition, where her preference for home is a paradigmatic presentation of the harmony that she seeks through the devotional aspect of womanhood. Her story starts with a dedication towards a home and ends in reversion to the ways of home after she sees through Sandeep's evil motive. The whole idea of belonging to a nation becomes gendered, where men are expected to be masculine and show masochistic traits in saving the nation, whereas women are supposed to be sacrificial, faithful, and pure. In Burdens of Nationalism, Uma Chakrabarti mentions how in Sri Lanka, men were the ones participating in armed conflicts, whereas women were expected to attach sentimental values and grief for the loss. Creation of the idea of women as mothers has attached the concept of reproduction to them, where they are bound into a heterosexual construct that only subordinates them. Though Bimola, as a dutiful and responsible wife, got attracted to the seduction of Sandeep and his comparison of her with the mother goddess rises her to a pedestal where she is inspired to coax her own husband to adopt the violent means and support Sandeep in burning the foreign goods in favor of uplifting Swadeshi. She is torn between the home and the world, where it is her Zanana that she connects herself with and wants to return to until it is too late, and Nikhilesh gets caught up amidst the turbulent violence in the nation. It therefore signifies that in the name of nation and nationalism, women are caught in between the fervor of men's politics, where she remains a puppet in the hands, just as the country is bound to suffer at the hands of violent politics. As Maria Miles notes, since the beginning of modern nation state, women have been colonized. This means the modern nation state necessarily controls their sexuality, their fertility, and their work capacity or labor power. And it is this colonization that constitutes the foundation of what is now being called civil society. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's cry for independent India through the national song of Vande Mataram in his famous novel Anandamat, where the motherland is praised to its utmost for being the bearer of rich culture and heritage, systematically shifts to father state through the turn of the century, when motherland, which initially referred to Bengal, shifted to India, and the country got raped in the name of nationalism. The rich cultural heritage of the nation got divided between different communities when seeds of communalism started to infringe on the nation with the division of Bengal in 1905, where the largely Muslim eastern areas were separated from the largely Hindu western areas. Nikhilesh, as the spokesperson of Tagore in the novel, speaks about the union of Hindus and Muslims in the fight against colonialism, as against Sandeep's view of excluding the Muslims from the nationalistic endeavor, as according to him, Bengal stood only as a land of the Hindus. Such polarization of the nation in the name of bigotry and religion led to the further disintegration of motherland, where warfare constituted the creation of a masculine country devoid of humanity and devotion. In the name of nationalism, therefore, comes the destruction of the land, from where thousands are uprooted, the land witnessed communal violence, mass murder, death of innocent people, and division of nation in the name of religion. In a similar context, Vandana Shiva notes, maldevelopment is seen here as a process by which human society marginalizes the play of the feminine principle in nature and in society. Ecological breakdown and social inequality are intrinsically related to the dominant development paradigm, which puts man against nature and women. The extremist mode of boycotting British goods resulted in great hardship for rural petty traders and peasants, most of them who were Muslims and low-caste Hindus. Tagore's construction of Chandranath Babu in the novel was based on the figure of Ashwini Kumar Datta of Bengal, whose support for rural development was strongly admired by him. The eroticization of nation with the lover becomes the most disturbing aspect of the novel. Sandeep pulls lover and motherland together, Vimola and country becomes one. As Tanika Sarkar in her work notes, the emotion that animates both and the emotion that they evoke are clearly erotic. The mother protects, the mistress leads to destruction. Though the novel is about politics, which is about the devotion to motherland and the call for Vande Mataram, which signifies a salutation to the motherland, there is no single mother in the text, nor is the real devotion towards any female character visible. It is this ironic promise of development of the nation through the means of loot, snatch, fake devotion, and force that the novel critiques. Therefore, in a similar context, in Shiva's comment, by the name of development, there is a maldevelopment process, a source of violence to women and nature throughout the world. This violence does not arise from the misapplication of an otherwise benign and gender-neutral model, but is rooted in the patriarchal assumption of homogeneity, domination, and centralization that underlie dominant models of thought and development strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Prithra. That was a very rich, contextually very, very rich talk. I would like to remind everyone that these proceedings are being recorded online, in both English and in Italian. And it would be good if many of these references to Tagore's works, and as I mentions many other researchers, Tagore, we could also count Tagore as a researcher, in fact, these should be looked up, I feel. To begin the discussion, I did have a few questions, Preeta. So countries, it seems to me that some countries, so for example, Germany and Russia, I am not aware of their ever being called a motherland. I think they have always been called a fatherland.
Fatherland.
Uh, have you studied this, first of all? And in your opinion, has that made any difference in the patriotic or nationalist sentiment within these countries amongst the general public? Do Russians feel differently to Indians if their country has always been called a fatherland, whereas ours perhaps has been called motherland? Similarly in Germany.
I feel the colonization that the India suffered from through centuries in the hands of the British, that kind of made this patriarchal endeavor to be initiated. And once they were trying to liberate the country from these clutches, so this patriarchal endeavors uh, went on being exaggerated. So there were no means to come out of these endeavors. So they were trying to, maybe they were trying to find freedom, but along with that, these patriarchal endeavors tried to be continued. While in the Western context, maybe the supreme imposition of colonization did not work as much as it was suffered in Bengal. So Bengal's division, as well as division in India, made it more of a, like, while it was, India was a bearer of culture, while it was preserving these cultures, so they were seen as the upholder of motherland. They were called motherland, but after that, since they were trying to find freedom for themselves, the fanatic cry, as I have already mentioned, started to disintegrate the nation more in this context. That's what I feel.
Would anyone else have questions to ask of Peter?
Yes, I've got some comments. When I think of India, I think of, well, I read as a teenager a book written by someone as a teenager, Santa Rama Rao, Home to India, where she described the role of women during the independence movement. It was very strong. And her mother was part of it. She was the younger generation that felt that they had lost out. They were, in a sense, deprived of the excitement that the older generation had. And then I think of Indira Gandhi, Gayatri Spivak, who is a brilliant literary critic and so forth, and Vandana Shiva in the world of ecology. And but also the British forced women's liberation on India. When my father, as an editor of the Times of India, one of his jobs was to go to tea with widows to break the idea of purdah. And it was something that was forced on the Indians rather than chosen by them. Whereas in Kerala, where there was an early movement to educate the women, the standard of living, mortality dropped, life expectancy rose, although it was still a poor part of India. In Afghanistan, the Russians were educating the women, which got resisted by the people who would become the Taliban. And the Americans were opposed to the Russians educating the women in Afghanistan. It all becomes very complex. And I wrote an essay, which I include in the appendix to the conference proceedings long ago, an essay on feminist Gandhi, who chose these feminist symbols of the spinning wheel and the fasting of anorexia, for which my father despised him. And I'm taking issue with my father. I wrote a poem once about to my imperial father from his colonial daughter. There is this kind of relationship even within a family, which on the larger scale is between nations. But I'm very grateful for your paper, but also concerned because I have seen one of my colleagues from the University of Colorado at Boulder did leave her husband and married an Indian and was killed by him. This violence is against women. I think it comes from insecurity. And what we don't want is power, but justice, equality, not one dominating over the other, but the sense of fairness. But thank you very much for your paper.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Pritha. And I did want to ask you very briefly, have you also read The King of the Dark Chamber by Tagore? This smallish play in which I feel you should maybe have a look at it, all right?
Okay, surely.
It doesn't really talk about politics or nationalism or anything of the sort. It is a symbolist play, all right? And
Okay.
so it's got characters like Mirabai, right?
Okay.
Characters like Mirabai, who is devoted to a masculine presence, right? It is never
All right.
revealed to anyone what this is, but at least the devotion is there, right?
Okay.
So yes, I suppose as a personal project, I guess it might help in your research. Right?
Thank you for the reference. I'll surely go through it.
It talks about a lot of different ways, really a lot of different ways in which this whole matter can be accomplished. And I am sure this can be extrapolated to what you're studying as well.
Yeah, surely. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Pritha. Next, we have Emma Stiegno. Is that right? Stiegno? Emma Stiegno speaking, who joins us from Venice University, Kafaskari, on Francesca Alexander. Her book, Roadside Songs of Tuscany. And we mentioned Ruskin in the beginning. This was a book which was edited by Ruskin and quite well appreciated. So I am personally very much looking forward to this. Emma.
Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to the organizer, Arjun and Julia, for, setting this wonderful, really an extraordinary conference. I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation, which is this. Can you see? Can you see it? Okay, thank you. So my paper is on Francesca Alexander, and in a way I see that there is a link with the previous presentation, although it spoke of India, a completely different context, because the issue of the female, say, attribution to a country and to people is central here in the operation that is performed by Ruskin in his edition of Francesca Alexander's collection of poems. I will talk about this book, which is a bulky one, and this is exactly Francesca Alexander edition, and I will talk about the story of this book because I think it is quite interesting and it was not explored before. So this book, in order to talk about this book, we should follow Ruskin in his penultimate journey on the continent. In August 1882, 5 months after suffering his third and most severe attack of mental illness, Ruskin set off on his doctor's recommendation on what was to be his last visit to Tuscany. He was accompanied by his valet and by the young artist W.G. Collingwood that Peter Berman introduced on the 15th. The tour was meant to consolidate his recovery and was equally divided in terms of the time spent between France, Champagne, Burgundy, and Jura, and Tuscany, Pisa, Lucca, Florence. The French itinerary took him on the old road to places he had repeatedly visited with his parents and recorded in his autobiography, Praeterita. As early as 1860s, Ruskin had planned a series of studies in Christian history and architecture to be entitled Our Fathers Have Told Us, which would study in depth the power of the church in the 13th century. To this purpose, in the 1882 journey, he visited also the Abbey of Citeaux in Burgundy, the cradle of the Cistercian order founded by Bernard de Clairvaux. Ruskin never accomplished this very ambitious project. He only published one volume of the series, which was the Bible of Amiens in 1880, and which was translated by Proust, as we know. But his interest in early monasticism shines through Roadside Songs of Tuscany. This is my statement. The story of the book starts in October, when Ruskin and Collingwood arrive in Florence and are introduced to the Alexanders, a family of Massachusetts expatriates who had settled in Tuscany in the 1850s and were part of the circle of Anglo-American artists living in Victorian Florence. Frances was a Boston portrait painter married to Lucia Gray Sweat, a wealthy woman of aristocratic connections, and their daughter Fanny. Born in Boston in 1837, Esther Frances spoke Italian as her second mother tongue and was particularly and unusually connected with the poorest among the local people. She cultivated her drawing skills by painting portraits of peasants, still lifes, and composing. This is a still life by Francesca. These are portraits by Francesca of portraying people that she knew. This is Clorinda Amidei, and the note says who she was, where she took the painting, and this is another one. These are portraits that he painted before meeting Ruskin. This is another one, which are quite beautiful, and either in private collections or in Brooklyn museums. So, and she also composed, precious missal-like sheets of drawings of flowers and folk songs with the care, the devotion, and the restraints of an amanuensis. The Alexanders spent their summer holidays in the Apennines at Abetone, where Fanny established a very close, sympathetic relationship with the peasant women of the village. A deeply pious Lutheran evangelical, Fanny was fascinated by the religious beliefs, traditions, and legends that were transmitted mainly through singing among the contadini, the peasants. In these mountains, as her biographer writes, everyone sang, I'm quoting, the farmers, the shepherds, the charcoal burners, who, as they watched their fires at night, kept one another company by singing together and improvising verses. Musically gifted herself, Fanny started recording the songs and their tunes in her manuscript. This work was intended to be both documentary and artistic, but also had philanthropic purposes, as Fanny wished to sell the manuscript to some American patron and redistribute the money among her poor Abetone friends. Fanny's interests were so closely intertwined with a bond of solidarity that local people saw her as a miracle worker who nursed the invalids, sent children to the seaside, and provided what they needed. A well-known source of Fanny's knowledge of Tuscan culture was Beatrice Bernardi di Pian degli Ontani. You can see the drawing by Francesca, an illiterate improvisatrice from whose viva voce Fanny transcribed most of her Tuscan songs. When Fanny met her, Beatrice was a celebrity in the Florence salotti, and yet she continued to want to live a peasant life of hardships to the end. In Roadside Song, Beatrice is given a leading place. Her portrait opens the collection, which is the one you can see, and 10 pages are devoted to first-hand details of her life. Another major source was Edvige Gualtieri, Fanny's loving, pious, and musical housemaid, whose fame is totally due instead to Ruskin's edition of Roadside Songs of Tuscany. She would be an obscure improvisatrice without Ruskin. Fanny meant her collection to be an elegiac monument to a territory and its people, to peasant life, to universal feelings, to orally preserved old music. Few days after his visit, Ruskin wrote to Mrs. Alexander saying that their meeting had marked a turning point in his life. I'm quoting from the letter, Ruskin's letter. "I've taken a new pen." This is the passage. "I've taken a new pen. It is all I can. I could learn an entirely new writing from some pretty hem of an angel's robe, to tell you with what happy and reverent admiration I saw in your daughter's drawings yesterday. Reverent not only of a quite heavenly gift of genius in a kind I had never before seen, but also of the entirely sweet and loving spirit which animated and sanctified the work, the serenity which it expressed in the surest faiths and best purposes of life." Ruskin proposed buying the manuscript, as it proved to be closely related, as he said, to his work in England, and he meant to exhibit it at St. George's Museum, Sheffield, for the benefit of the companions of the guilds of St. George and of local peasants. To this purpose, he wished Fanny to write, I'm quoting from the letter, by way of introduction to it, some brief sketches, as she may find easy of arrangement, of the real people whose portraits are given. This is the passage from the letter to Mrs. Alexander. The main object of the sketches would be, quoting, "the conveying to the mind of our English peasantry, not to say princes," between parentheses, "some sympathetic conception of the reality of the sweet soul of Catholic Italy." Their meeting marked a turning point for Fanny too. The news of Ruskin's visit and interest in her manuscript quickly spread throughout Florence, and she became a celebrity overnight. When Ruskin returned to England in November 1882, he was enthusiastic over his new treasure and began disseminating references to Fanny's work in his lectures. It was at this time that he started referring to Fanny in his public writings and letters as Francesca. A series of associations had to weave around disdain for Ruskin. He seems to become aware that that loving spirit inspiring her work was a Franciscan spirit, the one of Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint of the poor, and that this task was to bring the spirit forth in his edition. When Ruskin received Francesca's book from Florence, this is the way the manuscript is called from now on, he has expressed his bewilderment at the beauty of the manuscript, trusting that it soon would become precious to uncountable multitudes. He hinted at the need to change the form of the manuscript and announced the imminent publication of the story of Ida. The story of Ida is this little booklet by Francesca that Ruskin published, and this is the list edited by Ruskin. When he first saw the manuscript, he was struck by the similarities between the fragile young Italian girl dying young and enduring a life of suffering, and Rose Latouche, the young woman he devastatingly loved in his late years and who had died in 1875 and who was responsible for Ruskin's mental breakdown. But what also struck him was the ecumenical potential of the story. As Francesca reported, and this is a passage from Francesca's letter, he said a good deal about my little story of Ida, which he had just read, and quite took my breath away by proposing to take it away and have it printed. He said it would be a very useful religious book, especially from the absence of all sectarian feeling in it. And he seemed much pleased at the strong friendship and religious sympathy between Ida and myself. Belonging, as we did, to two different and usually opposing churches. And in connection with this, he spoke with much sadness of the enmity between different Christian sects, saying that he had known good Christians in all of them, which is my own experience. The need, end of quote, the need to bridge the fracture between Protestant and Catholic churches and overcome what he saw as one of the greatest cultural barriers dividing Europe from England and England within itself was a strong concern of late Ruskin. And the potential he found in the work of Francesca, a pious American evangelical who collected religious poems of Catholic contadini, became gradually clear. At this stage, the idea of keeping the manuscript of St. George's Museum had given way to the prospect of an imminent publication of the work. In the meantime, he had received from Francesca the short biographical sketches which he had asked and which were to accompany her drawings. The 10 issues of Roadside Songs of Tuscany appeared between April 1884 and August 1885. Ruskin worked intensely on one issue at a time, gaining the attention of the public step by step. Each of the thin issues was composite, consisting of 25, 30 pages of heterogeneous materials, a number of folk songs, 2 drawings, Francesca's prose sketches of the peasants, and some editors' notes. By December 1884, 4 issues had come out, and reviewers were puzzled and amazed by a work that, when completed, so they say, would be probably unique in the world of art and letters. Another reviewer defined it as sumptuous. In September 1885, the book appeared in the shape of the volume you have seen, a 340-page folio hardback volume. It was greeted by reviewer as a very sumptuous book, whose great social historical interest was to be, however, according to a reviewer, jeopardized by the hardly accessible format. It was difficult to carry it and study it. In the course of this editorial work, Ruskin had completely rearranged Francesca's manuscript. He selected from among the drawing and folk songs and changed their order so as to place first the ballad of Santa Zita, the main servant, actual patron, co-patron saint of Lucca, instead of the 2 religious hymns that opened the manuscript, and closed the book with a prose version of the legend of St. Christopher with her illustrations. These are the illustrations. The central section included 2 long religious songs, the Madonna and the Rich Man. Sorry, there is my cat who has come to visit. The Madonna and the Rich Man, the Madonna and the Gypsy. And Francesca, I'm showing The Madonna and the Rich Man. These are illustrations by Francesca with you see also the music, and the Madonna and the Gypsy, and Francesca's drawing of Christ and the woman of Samaria. This is the one. Accompanied by an important translator notes. These texts formed the backbone of the collection, what we might call its Christian spiritual framework, and were built around Francesca's drawings. Ruskin gave great importance to the people who sat for the drawings, the originals, as Francesca called them, of the Madonna, the Samaritan, St. Christopher, and the Gypsy. He saw a correspondence in their lives with the episodes and legends from the Gospel the songs speak of. He saw stories of poor, everyday saints as survivals of a monastic spirit he had been on the track of for some years. This is suggested by the editor's preface to the first issue, where Ruskin informs the reader that Francesca had chosen her models because they shared some, quote, circumstances and habitual tone of mind with the figures of the saint they represented. The model of the book must have been the Fioretti di San Francesco, as testified by some references subtly surfacing through the work and Ruskin's correspondence of those years. The Little Flowers of Frances is a medieval anonymous collection of legends about the life of St. Francis of Assisi and his early companions, one of the most beloved of medieval children's books. This is a definition. It was Cardinal Manning who first edited the Fioretti in English, in a book published in 1864 with the title of Little Flowers of St. Francis. Cardinal Manning, was on friendly terms with Ruskin, as well as with outstanding figures spiritually and socially engaged, such as Frédéric Ozanam, a Catholic medievalist scholar of Franciscan poetry in the 13th century and founder of the Charitable Society of Saint Vincent de Paul. The Fioretti has had to be a model, therefore. This is my impression for Ruskin's edition of Francesca Rozzai's Songs of Tuscany, with those prose sketches on the peasants' biographies that Ruskin commissioned to Francesca. Originally intended just to complement the drawings, such sketches in fact constitute the larger part of the complete work. They cover 136 to 340 pages, about 2/3 of the whole book. And their prominence is granted by an index of 21 names that opens the volume, in which are listed the dramatis personae, the persons, I'm quoting, whose characters are sketched or some account given of passages in their lives in illustrations of the Songs of Tuscany. In the introduction, Ruskin insists on the correspondence between painted and living characters, who are said to be embodiments of the characters of the ballads. The model of Santa Zita is her original, the saint servant. In fact, the saint servant was actually a perfect, dutiful, and happy farm servant who has, in reality, worked without wages, explains Ruskin. And the gypsy is really a girl of Roma blood who had actually rescued a young boy when all the women had withdrawn. Ruskin maintains that the drawing, therefore, were not just illustrations, but the evidence of the truthfulness of the stories told in the poems and the utter beauty of the portion of life that the biographical details describe in words. Francesca tells us in a confident and assertive narrative voice about Gigia, Lucia Santi, Geminiano Amidei, Emilia, Paolina. I'm mentioning the names that appear of the characters that we find in the drawings. Their brothers, mothers, sisters-in-law, neighbors, donkeys. In effect, she recreates a whole community. However, she writes at one point, I'm not writing a history of Cutigliano, but of Assunta, I mean, a name, a character, a peasant, who lived in one of its steep, narrow streets, just flights of low steps, but with beautiful gardens between the old houses and roses and jessamines hanging over their walls. In roadside songs, such prose sketches occur in issue after issue, which recreates the effect of a community of people with whom British readers become familiar gradually, as with characters in Victorian serial novels. They also interlace with a group of texts of Rispetti, shorter songs in blank verse, and Stornelli, short proverbial three-line songs, each focusing on a flower. For example, flower of the pea, flower of the maize, and then continues the little Stornelli, and associating the flower to a girl, to the love that whether the man cherishes or has lost, and so on. Interestingly, the ballads and songs are reported and translated, that are reported and translated, all treat of encounters. This is a point that is, I think, very interesting. Encounters between strangers, the woman of Samaria, the gypsy, and also the woman and the rich man. Encounters. Another important feature of these drawings and stories that Ruskin selects is that the characters are all women, and women, and Ruskin stresses the guiding power of womanhood in his introduction. Women are models of benevolence, of wisdom, of precious wisdom. So in these sketches, it seems to me that Ruskin, who was the drawing teacher, as we know, and mentor of Francesca, has also given Francesca the status of a narrator. Therefore, has empowered Francesca of a role, of a central role, not only of describing, but also of narrating, of telling, which she had not thought about in her manuscript recording. So she is a character herself in this book. And Francesca will collect so many stories, such a rich text and long text, that she won't be able to publish all these in Roadside Songs of Tuscany, and Ruskin will publish edit another volume in serial publication, in serial form, which is called Christ's Folk in the Apennines in 1887 and 1889. So she becomes really a writer. So Ruskin's massive editorial intervention gives provenance to the Christian frame and to the peasants' portraits and lives. And he also adds substantial notes to make the discourse particularly relevant to contemporary Britain. And he is not generous towards his British country fellows. In the long note on the gypsy character, for example, he attacks fiercely, severely, the British because of their intolerance. And he points at the much happier wisdom of the Italian peasantry to show that showed how deeply, I'm quoting, and cruelly the scorn of the gypsy race had infixed itself in the minds of the prosperous middle class of our island at the beginning of the century. And he quotes extensively from an entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1797 that it was still circulating. So, as I was saying, and the notes are also very important as far as religion is concerned. That is a long note on the clergy in which he criticizes, in a way, the Protestant incapacity to accept gold, for example, and wealth as parts of the divine and worship of God. All these notes are very important to mediate, I would say, Tuscan culture, the peasant culture, to the British. Roadside Songs of Tuscany coincides with the birth of an interest in peasantry in the 1870s. And it is also a very precious ethnographic document of that world, as the reviewers had pointed out. So it seems to me, and I am approaching to the end, Ruskin performed a complex act of mediation by means of multiple processes of translation in order to convey the sense of a whole culture that was disappearing. These processes of translation range from the interlinguistic one, Tuscan English, to the intersemiotic one involving music, drawing, biographies, editor's notes. The use of heterogeneous materials proved, therefore, to be functional to get a real sparkle of that world. As Yuri Lotman, a semiotician, important semiotician, says, it is an inevitable fact that the space of reality cannot be represented by a single language, but only by an aggregate of languages. So it seems to me that Ruskin, the semiotician, is actually aware, and is performing this very, important and modern operation, cultural operation. So this is the complex editorial work that produced the sumptuous book out of Francesca's delicate fioretti. Francesca's book was in the end published as it was in 1897 in this edition later, which was, in a way, the original manuscript is contained in this later book. But but the Roadside Songs of Tuscany closes with 2 sections of letters from Francesca telling some, Ruskin, the editor, disappears from the scene, and Francesca tells some other stories in conclusion, reported by her maid Edvige, about women and children, on family life and mutual help, poverty and charity. The volume ends with the evening prayer that Francesca assures in a note all peasants sing to their children. It seems to me an appropriate ending for a book which was not intended to be a monument of an idealized view of rural life, but a memorial of living Tuscan peasants that aimed to rekindle in modern Britain that mysticism of everyday life, which Ruskin saw as the core of the legacy of early monasticism he was searching for when he embarked on his 1882 journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was a Wonderful. Did Ruskin mention Francesca in his autobiography?
Yes, yes, yes. It is mentioned as a now the autobiography, Ruskin's autobiography, is written exactly soon after, from 1885 to 1889. So exactly soon after completing this work.
Right.
So it is interesting to see all this, because he finishes writing for Sclavigera in 1884, December, and soon starts Roadside Songs of Tuscany. So, and still it's in little, issues. Right. And Praeterita starts soon after in issues, because as we know, Praeterita was published in booklets at first. So yes, this is an important figure. Yeah, for Ruskin, a very important figure, who he says he attributes to Francesca a very important, also a healing role in that moment, very hard moment for him. He, thanks to Francesca, he said he recovered and he found a spiritual support, say.
Any questions?
I would love to make some comments.
Thank you.
I so love this presentation. Marchese Giannozzo Pucci loaned me his copy of the Road Songs because he had loved them as a child, and his family knew Francesca Alexander. And he allowed me to publish them on the web, especially the one about the Madonna and the Gypsy, because of our work with Roma. What I especially love about Ruskin and the Pre-Raphaelites is that they have managed to shed British classism, which I find is a bane in English culture. This sense of arrogance and entitlement of the few over the others, and the belief that those who are not entitled and privileged are lesser human beings. This simply is not true. And what I loved when I came to live in Tuscany is that the contadini and also the Florentines, working class people, have the sense of dignity, which in England we tended to have lost. There's a sense of the chip on the shoulder, which isn't here. I was able to record all of Dante's Commedia being recited cantastorie by the son of contadini, and I have it on the web with all of the illustrations and so forth, because this is living culture. And I'm so grateful to you for putting this paper together, especially on the sense of Franciscanism, because I sense that the explosion which happened with Dante and Giotto was Franciscan but lay. It's not the church hierarchy. It's the ordinary people responding and seeing that they are living the gospel here and now, transcending time, which is what Francesca Alexander also does in her illustrations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
It's also Gandhian, isn't it? Living with the untouchables and so forth.
Yes, yes. I mean, the sense, yes, Ruskin, of course, lived in that particular period. And so the ecumenical breadth of his scope was already that of trying to make Christians talk with one another and plan a better society. But of course, I'm sure that, and in later years, and also in Post Sclavigera and some notes, he thinks about a spirituality that is beyond religious barriers. So religious might should let people talk and communicate and get together, not separate. Certainly, this is what Ruskin thought about religion.
Yes.
And yes, and what we think now as something, I mean, as an accepted, hopefully fact, but not so easily accepted. But at the time of Ruskin was not so obvious, of course. Yes.
Emma, have you read his? I think it is Sesame and Lilies.
Yes.
And have you written on that as well, on how he looks at the whole issue of the role of women in society, and whether and how it really can be fit into what's being talked about today?
Yes, thank you.
I do find it to be quite a precious document. I don't think it's been looked at carefully enough.
I agree with you. I agree with you. We often find the quotation from Ruskin as anti-feminist. I mean, the current, criticism, feminist criticism, picks up Ruskin's saying on the role of women of being, the angel of the house, the guiding angels as anti-modern. But Ruskin is not actually thinking so. First of all, Sesame and Lilies is an essay on education, and he is already, as I tried to say also with Francesca, he is really empowering women, getting the means for women to talk, to write, to be artists, and so on. So the vision of the woman who is subjected to man is actually contradicted by what Ruskin was actually doing, educating them. Most of these friends were not married, were single women having an independent life, certainly rich in spirituality. So with the idea that one can see, as difficult, but I think that the monastic model is very strong for Ruskin. So we can find it difficult to accept, but for him, the sense of restraint, the sense of doing without unnecessary riches and so on, all this is very Ruskinian. So also the idea. Pardon? Yeah, so that's also his vision of a woman might be also criticized, but I think that, and this is very, very important, and one should write more about this, that Ruskin had so many female friends, so many women, and had done so much for the women of his own times that it's unfair. It's really unfair to think about that he was against the liberation of women. I have also had the possibility of reading quite a few books and editions of popular folk songs, and I found that most of them stem from Ruskin's book, and all of them are written by women, translated by women, and so on. So he had really a very long line of followers, let's say, among women. Yes, and we certainly should write more about this and talk about more.
Yes, that's it. There's a parallel also to Walter Savage Landor, who wrote these wonderful imaginary conversations with the women. Yeah. And although he had a disastrous marriage, as also had Ruskin.
Yes.
And also I'm finding Frederick Leighton was splendid in supporting George Eliot and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. This sensitivity on the part of men who were creative for women is important. And then when I was only 16 when I was in college in California, but I found in the stacks a book, beautiful illustrations by a young Irish girl to Blake's Songs of Innocence, where the village was with white cabins, poor Irish peasants. that Ruskin had supported its publication. So there he was not only for women and girls, but also for the Irish.
Yeah.
He is essentially inclusive of
Absolutely.
all. And that will be what we'll be talking about in the next paper, I think, is that?
That is so. Before we move on to Julia and Daniel, who I am very much looking forward to seeing, Emma, really, I would love you to write on this, and maybe in the next conference, I don't know, we could hear something from you on this particular subject. I have also been thinking Ruskin's relationship with Effie. I have also been feeling for a number of years someone should write upon it sensitively enough.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
That is
Have you
very-
read The Marriage of Inconvenience? Have you read the bulky book? Because the author reconstructs the story in a fairer way and showing, yes. So I would suggest reading that book, Marriage of Inconvenience, because you find, a more truthful, probably, version of the story. But yes, it would be great. I take this opportunity to say that we have a Center for Ruskin Studies in Venice now, which is called FORCE, and that we are launching a call for papers, and I will send but it's on the newsletter of the Guild. Of course, we are both companions, so you can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Right.
Move on to Julia and Daniel.
How
Julia.
can I do sharing, screen sharing?
You simply press on the button on the bottom. You can begin.
Right. Okay. Mhm. Right. This is where, as we were beginning, and we were talking also about bookbinding. Arjun has had a workshop on bookbinding. What is a book? It's a primitive computer. It programs a voice in prose or poetry with phonetic symbols that can reach beyond one's present time and space. A manuscript is a handcrafted book, and a printed book is an industrialized book. The revolution must seize the printing press and become a cottage industry of electronic modes of communication. And I think this would allow for women with babies in cradles to enter into far more the world of creativity. And we had this lovely presentation by Sriram Rajasthekaran on the book as a kind of metaverse, an alternate universe. Buckminster Fuller spoke of the cup as an extension of the hand, the wheel as an extension of the leg. The book is an extension of the brain. And I'm just going to quickly go through the historic book, which is handcrafted. Here is Dante's teacher reciting his book to his students who write it down in the Arabic manner. Among them is Dante and Guido Cavalcanti. And this is the book that Dante, I think, wrote from those lectures. And we also have in these manuscript books music, not only just prose spoken words, but words that are sung. And here we see the voice, almost like a Zoom box, of Bonagiunta da Luca singing Donne che avete intellette d'amore in the Purgatorio. And this is what I've done on the computer. If you click on that arrow when you see it in the computer scene, you will actually have the music which we performed of Donne che avete intellette d'amore from the music of the period. Books in this period had gold leaf that flickered and seemed to move like movies in candlelight. And then this is the Libro del Chiodo, in which Dante was exiled and also sentenced to death. And its binding was made by Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu with my bookbinding master, Enrico Giannini. And there they are celebrating 40 years of UNESCO's World Heritage. Daniel created this nail, the Libro del Chiodo, and these clasps using his grandfather's coppersmithing tools. And then when another of our workers was banished from Florence, exiled, we jokingly had him posed with the Libro del Chiodo. This is Nicolai Ovray, who at that point returned to his city for the period for his banishment in Romania. Paper marbling is wonderful to do because everything comes out differently. You can never repeat it. And here I am with my granddaughter creating these pages, which we use in our bindings. And sewing the gatherings. This is our library. The Roma built the bookshelves, and this is a sewing frame from my convent from the 19th century, Victorian. This is a Florentine bookbinder who is creating the cover for the facsimile of the manuscript of the oldest complete Bible in Latin, the Codex Amiatinus. And these are my bookbinder teacher's tools, and we make these bookmarks with the gold leaf pressed on. Now, what we did here, we celebrated all of our Dante scholars in the cemetery. And this particular book here came to me through COVID from Delhi. It's a lovely facsimile edition of Joseph Garrow's translation of Dante's Vita Nuova into English, the first one. And he is the son of an Indian princess. And I showed you the photograph of the painting of him. And these are the books that we have created. And sort of very much using William Morris type. And here again, this is the Casa Guidi windows in 2 languages. And I also use CDs of the textual readings. And web weaving, this is the book's newest form. And you can use Word, which has a lot of garbage underneath it, or PDF, which is rather static. It's sort of still locked into the page formatting of a printed book. Or you can use HTML, JPEG, MP3, FTP, color, and sound are free. And you can actually go back to the memory systems of the very beautiful handcrafted medieval books with it. And now we are also using Zoom and PowerPoint and MP4. And bookcases and cradles. Now, Daniel showed up here in 2008 and restored all of the ironwork in our cemetery. He was so excellent that our restorer, who is Opificio della Pietratura, top level in Florence, invited him to help him restore Donatello's pulpit in Prato. When Daniel came, he was almost barefoot in poverty. But these are the bookshelves that we built, and Daniel created these cross lilies, which I copied from the Bodleian Library, where my father used to work as a boy and where I've read medieval manuscripts. And here he is with his tools creating those. And here he is with his wife building the cradle that will be for the baby that will be born the next day. And these are how we made our cradles. Those are my specifications. To save wood, you cut them this way. And because cradle has to conform to the shape of the human body, which is curves, not squares. And I also use the Fibonacci curves of the fresco painted in the house, the villa of the Cardinal Bessarione, who is a very major person coming from Greece with Greek manuscripts to Florence. And then Daniel and Vandana created this book because all of the other Roma who came here were illiterate from the centuries of slavery. And the fact that in Romania, you have to pay for schooling, and they were too poor for that. So we created this textbook in 4 languages. This is the word for man, and the word for woman, and the word for child, and so forth, for father, for mother, for children. And these are Daniel's drawings for constructing a house. Also, we found that this is Diamanta. We found that the Roma have a vast oral library of stories, which are the same stories that are in Shakespeare and Apuleius. about the king with the 3 daughters, and the 3rd daughter tells her father she loves him as much as salt, and so he is furious with her and rejects her. And we also have Roma come. At first, the women did not participate in our alphabet school. And then years later, the men told me that women would not tolerate being in the same room with men, not their husbands. So we threw the men out to be under the archway outdoors under with a trestle table. And we ended up with 19 participants, women and children, in the library. And they now all know how to read and write. This is Zoita. She's a widow with 2 children, who was begging in the streets. Here she's looking at an illustrated Dante saying, "Oh, bello." We used to hold our alphabet school. We don't need to any longer because they now know how to read and write. But with our crostini, chicken livers in less bread and apples. And then these are Zoita's 2 children, Ferdinando and Esmeralda. Esmeralda, 10 years old, came to my computer where I was copying out from an early printed book of Brunetta Latino on Aristotle on justice. And she read it perfectly. And then the Comune threw them out. They went to Spain. And also, a friend of mine, Swedish, taught me from her being taught by a gypsy in Sweden, in Göteborg, how to make these boxes, which then Daniel and Vandana made and played all kinds of games, making even little tiny ones competing with each other. And then the twin daughters of my ordinand candidate, whom I was tutoring when I was in the convent. She's a mother who was training to be a Methodist minister with 5 daughters. These 2 daughters came and taught the Roma how to do incisions in marble. This is Nicolai's daughter, the one you saw with the Libro del Chiodo. And she's sculpting on that Catherine MacKinnon. Catherine MacKinnon was very poor from the island of Mull, who became the governess to the Tsar of Russia. She's buried here, but her tomb is lost, so we don't know exactly where she was buried, but we want to put the stone up to mark her existence. Frederick Douglass, the ex-American slave, came here, 11th of May, 1887, and Daniel chiseled this. He's also chiseling this one next, which is for Sarah Parker Raymond, abolitionist, Afro-American, who came to study medicine at the Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova, founded by Dante's Beatrice's father and by Dante's Beatrice's nurse for the nurses and the oblati. And Sarah Parker Raymond came with a letter from Giuseppe Mazzini. And we feel it's right that Daniel, whose own ancestors were slaves for longer than were the Blacks in America, of the monasteries and the nobles in Romania, after they had come from India, should be the one who sculpts these, and so forth. And so that was our bookbinding thing. And I think we can also see the film of Daniel's family. Is it coming through all right? It's going to start rather slowly, okay? And we'll start with Rachmaninoff's music because he composed this for this Island of the Dead, our cemetery. And it's called Daniel in the Island of the Dead. There had been a terrible storm and Daniel had to restore many tombs. There had already been a great deal of vandalism when we came. Yeah. Okay. It's only 7 minutes.
Julia, have you started the video? We can't see it.
Can you get it or not?
No.
No? Is it not coming through?
It is not. It is not.
Okay, that's a shame. Let's see, there might be, wait a moment. Right. Condivido, okay. Oh, what a shame. Okay, so it's not working. No. So we'll close that, but it's a wonderful film that shows the real beauty of the cemetery. And so let's interrupt the condivisione and allow people to comment. You will be able to find the film on the web. We put it up on the web on YouTube.
Could you share with us a link in the chat box?
Okay, right. If we can go back to the condivisione, there it is. Can you see that? The bottom one is the best. Can you see it? No.
No.
No. Okay. Okay. YouTube, and then ask it for Daniel Isola Morti.
All right.
Okay. But it's lovely. It's just 7 minutes, and it was made by someone who works on the buses in Florence. I've been finding that there's so much creativity amongst people who are not university professors and so on, which is also what Ruskin was doing. And it was why he was telling second-class women to read Aurora Leigh by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, because it's a poem about women's education. And Daniel, would you like to say something? Daniel's rather shy. Are you in the image at all? Because we can't see ourselves, right? But Daniel has done so much. It's now 15 years he's been here, and so very grateful. Okay. So Nick Peters.
Julia,
Yes.
are these Roma stories being recorded?
I hope we were recording them. Yes.
No, not this particular presentation.
Okay. Yes, I
people.
am recording Diamanta's and Yonel's stories, and I've got a Yeti microphone, and the stories are wonderful, you know, because she tells them so vivaciously. But I've been trying to get schools to invite her to tell stories, but they're too afraid of Roma to have her come. But it's a real patrimonial that shouldn't be lost. It should be shared. It's the best way to undo discrimination, racism. And it is what Ruskin was doing with Francesca Alexander.
Yes, absolutely. I thought about that. I mean, what you are doing is exactly what Ruskin was doing, when Francesca was doing. And
Yes. It's a chain.
Yes, it's a chain. It was certainly a time in the second half of the 19th century in which these scholars, people, anthropologists were interested in folk tales, and Tommaseo, D'Antona, and Tigri, all these, I mean, collected stories. But I'm surprised about what you say, that there is no interest, anthropology, on the side of anthropologists, or in these stories of the Roma. This is surprising for me, because today, I mean, it's the sensibility towards this patrimony should be,
yes.
I mean, quite, I wouldn't say obvious, but certainly accepted. But yeah. So it's even more important what you are doing with them. It's true that maybe these people have to, the Roman people and people who have so much suffered from margination, that it's not easy for them to trust
Right.
who approaches them. Yes. Might gain, first of all, their affection, their respect, and then they will yeah. talk about themselves. It's not an obvious.
So we did it with making 18 cradles. Because we saved the babies from being taken by social assistants. And social assistance removes them from their culture, their language has forbidden them, they're forbidden to see their parents, and they end up not wanting to go on living because your culture is your identity.
Of course.
It is your wealth.
Of course.
It's not money that is your wealth. It's all of these customs that have grown up over hundreds, thousands of years, and it shouldn't be broken, and it shouldn't be mechanized, industrialized, and sanitized. It's so rich and has so much beauty.
Yes.
Mm. Right. So
we come now to Nick Peters, excuse me. And
okay, thank you. Thank you.
I've quite been looking forward to this one as well. Dr. Nick Peters, art historian from Belgium, is going to be speaking about the Pre-Raphaelites, and Western thought, progressive Western thought, as well as, and this I am really excited about, relating it to indigenous Indian philosophy. Nick, yes.
Yes, thank you. Apologies if I don't manage to show you my illustrations. I was told to go on at 2 p.m. and as I am not very good with technology, I have not yet completely managed to integrate the PowerPoint into my screen here, but during the talk, I will do my best to repair that. Yes, so actually, what I want to talk about is the Pre-Raphaelites in Florence and how they were linked to indigenous Indian thought, but I will, because I am specialized in Evelyn de Morgan, mainly talk about Evelyn de Morgan, who was a Pre-Raphaelite artist and whose cousin, Mary Spencer Stanhope, is buried in Julia's Cemetery. I will mainly talk about Evelyn de Morgan, her interest in spiritualism, and I will compare that to the interest in spiritualism that we find in the poems of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, whom of course is also entombed in Julia's Cemetery. And I will then try to connect this Western spiritualism, which was an inspiration for very progressively thinking people in the Victorian era, many of them women. I will then try to connect that with Indian indigenous thought. This talk is based on an article that Judy Oberhausen and I published in the journal, The Browning Society Notes. It is a shorter and adapted version of this article. I will start with a quote from Lillian Whiting. "No city, perhaps from the days of the myth and miracles of the saints to the present hour, has had its daily life so characterized by these wonders as Florence. and the Hawthorns, the Trollops, and Mrs. Browning were especially interested during several months in studying these psychic occurrences. Now, the psychic occurrences referred to by Lillian Whiting in her description of Florence in the mid-19th century have become an important part of the history of modern spiritualism. The Anglo-American artistic colony in Florence and the villas of nearby Bellosguardo was as enthusiastically caught up in this phenomenon as were their compatriots at home in London and in Boston. Now, amongst those profoundly influenced by the spiritualist movement were two women artists who spent a lot of a big part of their life in Florence. That was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who lived from 1806 till 1861, and the painter, the Pre-Raphaelite painter, Evelyn de Morgan, who lived from 1855 till 1990. So these were two creative women who spent much of their lives in Florence. Now, first of all, I will try to reveal the connection between the spiritualism of both these women. I'm sorry about that pause. As I told you, I wasn't completely ready yet. I have to put some order in my notes first, but it is very interesting that we first look at a book published by Evelyn de Morgan's mother-in-law, Sophia Friend de Morgan, and this is a seminal spiritual text published in 1863, and its title was From Matter to Spirit. I will explain how the artist Evelyn de Morgan employed the private practice of automatic writing as an inspiration for her strange and lovely paintings which describe spiritual progress. The purpose of tracing the careers of these disparate figures, Evelyn de Morgan and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, is to demonstrate how the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg were an important inspiration for the beliefs and activities of both of them. It was probably owing to the writings of Swedenborg. I seem to have a problem with the camera here now. Apologies for this. My computer is very old and I think it won't last much longer.
No, it doesn't seem to be working, right?
Right. Perhaps we could interrupt a bit while he gathers, his notes together.
Yeah.
And give an overview to Rachel as to what we've been saying, especially Emma Steinu's paper on Ruskin and Frances Alexander, which was absolutely lovely. And we seem to have centered today, including with Nick Peters' presentation, on Ruskin and women and India and women, and seeing all of these in a much more sympathetic light than is generally received opinion. Rachel, would you like to chime in on anything about the companions of St. George? Because Emma is also a companion, Arjun is a companion, Nicholas has had to leave us and he will be getting the rest of this by the recording. But I think it's worth a celebration.
Yes, I'm sorry I couldn't make it in earlier and I've only just gotten back home in order to join in. So Emma, I look forward to listening to your paper on the recordings later. So for those who don't know, the Guild of St. George is a charity that John Ruskin set up in the 1870s. And his idea behind it was really to make life better, to give rise to true wealth in the sense of having access to beauty, to nature, to art training, and so on for all in many ways. And that body still exists today as an educational charity registered in the United Kingdom. But we have companions in, I think, about 14 countries now. And there are about 325 of us, of whom at least a few of us are in the meeting today. And really, in terms of joining over the years, it's been sort of expressing an interest in Ruskin and his ideas and why they still have meaning and resonate today and for individual companions. And it also gives nice opportunities to get to know people. So on Thursday evening, I think it was, Deirdre Kelly, who is based in Venice, was launching her exhibition at Brantwood, Ruskin's home. And there were a number of companions who were able to be there that evening for the launch of her exhibition, which was a lovely get together. And I can keep talking for a very long time, but I'm also conscious that there are others who probably should be speaking at this point. I mean, with Deirdre, we had the joy of, normally one signs the roll, which is a big book that a formal signature goes into, and then the name is calligraphed beside it. And normally we do those at AGMs, but very occasionally, if a companion is traveling from abroad and is not normally able to be in the UK during the AGM period, we make arrangements for them to sign the roll at another time. And so Deirdre joyfully signed the roll on Thursday evening as part of her exhibition opening. So for those of you who are international companions and have never signed the roll, if you're coming to the UK at a different time of year, it's not always possible, but if we can, we do our best to try to facilitate signing the roll at another time.
That is good to know. Yes, I haven't signed it myself.
Exactly. So.
I wish I could, but at 86, I'm beyond traveling.
Yes, I'm just thinking there's never been a precedent for carrying the roll outside of the UK for the signature.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't think that's ever been done. But
Nick, how's it going? Can we continue with yours? Were you able to sort the technical issue out?
I don't think so.
So if the technical issue was the flickering thing, it's
Yes.
apparently it's a known issue with Zoom. because Kate Mason, another companion of the Guild, who used to run the Big Draw and is now chair of the Society of Designer Craftsmen, she had that problem. And she looked it up, and there is a way to fix it, but it takes a bit of sort of fiddling with your own computer system somehow to make it go away. But it is a known issue, and there's instructions on Zoom for how to fix it somewhere.
All right. I'll have to continue with my talk. Maybe I can switch off the camera and just go on talking. Is that all right for you?
Yes.
I think that would be best, yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So we were talking about Evelyn de Morgan, the Pre-Raphaelite painter who lived in Florence every year for half a year, about Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who came to live in Florence, and about Sophia de Morgan, who was Evelyn's mother-in-law and who wrote about spiritualism. And she was inspired by Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic. Swedenborg was a highly unusual medium to whom spiritual truths were revealed through visions, which he recorded in books such as Ariana Celestia. And that was, these books were published in the 18th century. We know also that Elizabeth Barrett Browning read Swedenborg's books and treatises, and this started in the winter of 1851-52. So we know that Elizabeth Barrett Browning was very interested in Swedenborg, most probably because as a result of his visions, Swedenborg came to believe that the object of earthly life is moral development and that the process of spiritual development continues in the afterlife. Such ideas were very welcome to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who, although deeply religious, was quite disappointed with institutionalized religion. And in Swedenborg's thinking, we can also see a link to Indian belief that the Indian belief in reincarnation, and that you have to evolve throughout a number of stages into becoming an ideal being. Now, during the early phase of her interest in spiritualism, Barrett Browning was an inquiring but fairly neutral observer, often expressing reservations about spiritualist experiments, even those that she had personally witnessed. Much of her criticism was directed against the theatricality of communal spiritual practice. Consequently, it is no surprise that in due course, she turned to other means of trying to make contact with the other side. focusing on the private spiritualist practice of automatic writing as a more direct means of spiritual communication. She was already familiar with the practice through first-hand reports by friends such as James Freeman Clarke and William Wetmore Story. When writing to her sister Arabella in 1853, she gave an accurate description of the method of spirit writing. And I quote, "You are to understand that there are two kinds of spiritual writing, one by the hand of the medium, the hand being used as an unconscious machine, and the other one where no visible agency is used at all." It was that during the period of 1854, that Barrett Browning enthusiastically embarked on spiritual investigations that included automatic writing with story, with Hiram Powers and others. Apparently, the results were mixed because by August of 1854, she characteristically declared that the scribbling could be both curious and capricious. In spite of these doubts, in the summer of 1857, Barrett Browning became again involved, but this time deeply in automatic writing under the influence of her close friend, the American heiress and purported medium, Sophie May Eckley, who lived from 1822 till 1874. The two women formed an intense relationship during which they produced writing and drawings, examples of which are in the Henry W. and Albert A. Burke collection at the New York Public Library. Their experiments continued for almost 2 years, but ended in disappointment when Barrett Browning was given reason to believe that Eckley was fraudulent. Her disillusionment was particularly keen because many of the messages that Sophie relayed, she claimed to have come from Barrett Browning's own deceased loved ones. On the 30th of August, 1859, which is coincidentally also Evelyn de Morgan's birthday, Barrett Browning sent a letter to Sophie to end their spiritualist activities and their friendship. According to Catherine Porter, the poet, although still expressing a belief in spirits that communicate, felt that no spirit belonging to her had ever, through Sophie's mediumship, manifested itself to either of them. Barrett Browning later described Sophie to Fanny Howarth as utterly false. So that was quite a big disappointment, but Barrett Browning kept believing in spirits that could communicate with us here on our side. The reason why the poet's faith in the existence of a spirit world remained strong even after disillusionment was probably her adherence to Swedenborgian theology. Over the years, she had studied it closely and had come to the conclusion that only the Swedish mystic could throw light on the spiritualist phenomenon. It is no wonder then that Barrett Browning's creative work acknowledges this profound interest in Swedenborgian spiritualism. She herself admits as much in another letter to her sister Arabella about Aurora Lee. As Elise Lawton Smith has noted, There are passages in Aurora Leigh which poetically reconstruct Swedenborg's ideas about love and action being the sources of an upward progress through life and the afterlife, the natural and the spiritual worlds. These passages demonstrate that Barrett Browning saw the artist as a mediator between the two spheres. It might even be suggested that she regarded the practice of art as a kind of mediumship in the most positive meaning of that word, with the artist in the role of a messenger from heaven, as in the following verses, and I quote, "I forgot, no perfect artist is developed here. From any imperfect woman, flower from root, and spiritual from natural, grade by grade, in all our life. Art is much, but love is more. O art, my art, thou art much, but love is more. Art symbolizes heaven, but love is God and makes heaven." It is striking that Barrett Browning uses terminology in this passage similar to that which the Swedish mystic himself employs to describe his cosmology in essays like De Commercio Animae et Corpus. Now let's go back to Evelyn de Morgan, her mother-in-law, by whom she was influenced very much. This was the spiritualist writer Sophia Friend de Morgan, who lived from 1809 till 1892. Sophia was a contemporary of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and although it is not certain that they ever met, documentary evidence reveals that they were aware of each other. There is a reference to the death of Sophia de Morgan's daughter in a letter from Barrett Browning to her sister Arabella on April the 3rd, 1854. Likewise, Sophia de Morgan mentions the death of Barrett Browning in her book From Matter to Spirit. The complete title of this book was From Matter to Spirit, the result of 10 years experience in spirit manifestations intended as a guide to inquirers. Both of these women belonged to a large network of progressive, and I've got to put some order in my notes once again. I apologize. So these two women, Barrett Browning and Sophia de Morgan, were part of a large network of progressive women. Let us not forget that the suffragettes actually emerged from, for a large part at least, from spiritualist circles, because spiritualism was about the only place in Victorian society where women had leadership. It was like that because women were regarded as being more sensitive to the spirits than men. And I studied the spiritualist magazine or journal Light for many years, and as you see the rise of the women's movement for suffrage, you can see that the articles in the Light Journal evolve from purely spiritualist, purely religious, to political. Spiritualists like, for instance, Emily Ford, who was at the Slade School of Art with Evelyn de Morgan, was first a spiritualist in her articles for the journal Light, but then started to publish articles about women's rights, and she also became friends with a number of progressive politicians. Another woman who was very much active in these circles was Annie Besant, who was influenced by Madame Helena Blavatsky. And Madame Helena Blavatsky, she was in her writings about theosophy, very influenced by indigenous thought. This is very important because later on in her life, after she had been a spiritualist and a political activist, Annie Besant became the leader of the Theosophist movement and moved the headquarters of the movement to India. She was also instrumental in mentoring Krishnamurti, who later on in life distanced himself from the Theosophist movement. But to continue with Sophia de Morgan, of whom Elizabeth Barrett Browning was well aware, Sophia de Morgan was part of a circle of women interested in both spiritualism and social reform. Other women in this circle were Lady Noel Byron, Anna Brownell Jameson, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Mary Howitt. The nexus between spiritualism and feminism has been well documented by Alex Owen, Janet Oppenheim, Ruth Brandon, and Howard Carr. For such 19th century women spiritualism, with its lack of dogma and hierarchy, became a new source of female empowerment. Victorians generally perceived women to be better mediums than their male counterparts because of their keen sense of intuition, and therefore many of them played prominent roles in the history of the movement. More importantly, however, these women were particularly inspired by the Swedenborgian notion that the purpose of life is continual development and that charity and social responsibility were integral to this process. And so for women like Barrett Browning, de Morgan, and others, spiritualism became not only a belief in the afterlife, but also a commitment to promoting the social good in this life. And this, of course, links them to a later generation that was inspired by William Morris and John Ruskin, the people who fought against the police, or actually we should say, defended themselves against a very violent police force on Bloody Sunday in Trafalgar Square. William Morris was there. Walter Crane, the other socialist pre-Raphaelite artist, was there. And Annie Besant was there, and Walter Crane even describes how she defended herself with her handbag against 5 policemen with truncheons. So she must have been quite a personality. Evelyn de Morgan, who in her paintings very often shows the spiritual evolution that Swedenborg talked about. Evelyn de Morgan was also very good friends with William Morris, who was, of course, very much influenced by John Ruskin. And as you probably all know, William Morris was one of the first socialists in Britain. But let's now continue with Sophia. One last thing about Sophia. In her book, From Matter to Spirit, Sophia emphasized how private spiritualist practice could become an aid to artistic creativity. Automatic writing and drawing were vividly illustrated and encouraged as means by which individuals with highly developed spiritual natures could become mediums for the conveyance into a unique collaboration with a spiritual entity that was expressed through symbolic language. Now, the Pre-Raphaelite painter Evelyn Pickering de Morgan was strongly influenced, as I've already said, by her mother-in-law, Sophia. And she used spiritualist experiments in trance to access her creativity, sorry about that. I would like to say to increase her creativity. Born in 1855 into an aristocratic family, Evelyn was already an ambitious artist and a progressive-minded young woman when she met her future husband, William de Morgan, and his Bohemian family in the early 1880s. In Sophia de Morgan, she would find a mentor who introduced her to the aesthetic potentialities of private spiritualist practice. For an idealistic young woman such as Evelyn, who already had a penchant for symbolism and allegory in her art, her reading of the following passage in From Matter to Spirit must have been revelatory. And I quote, "Each medium is chosen for a special quality which enables him to transmit the sentiments required. In the case of communication from spirit to mortal, the imagery or ideas contained in the medium's brain takes the place of words. And each medium furnishes a different capacity for the transmission of feeling or thought, and a different vocabulary or series of images in which to embody it." Unquote. After some unsatisfactory experiences with seances, Evelyn and her husband William embarked on their own prolonged experiment in automatic writing. In 1909, they published their findings anonymously under the title The Result of an Experiment. This book consisted of over 200 transcripts meant to be messages from spiritual entities. There are striking similarities between the language used in the automatic scripts and imageries imagery found in the Morgan's paintings. The primary correspondence, however, is the parallel descriptions of Swedenborgian spiritual evolution. An examination of one of Evelyn's key paintings will serve to demonstrate that de Morgan developed a strong faith in the Swedenborgian idea that spiritual evolution was a process of moral growth. And I hope to show you this painting at the end of my talk, because at the moment I technically don't see how to do it, but I hope to do it at the end of this talk. And this is the painting, The Kingdom of Heaven Suffered Violence, and the violent take it by force. It takes its title from the Gospel of St. Matthew, but its meaning may be found more precisely in spiritualism. Through a serpentine composition and carefully modulated color changes, it is a succinct statement about spiritual progress in the afterlife, where man still determines his own destiny. The lower portion of the painting depicts those despondent souls who remain still earthbound. They are surrounded by other undeveloped souls rendered as fallen angels. Further along the steep path, we find figures who struggle mightily to overcome their base human instincts and egotism, and some have broken free of their fetters. The figures at the top of the path still struggle, but they glimpse the light and hear the music of the spheres. At the top of the painting are the souls who soar heavenward. The following passage from the automatic scripts, with its similar imagery, shows just how interdependent de Morgan's art and spiritualist practice had become. And I quote, "Loud above all earthly strains sounds the ringing music of the spheres. Pierce upwards through the dim world of undeveloped spirits. Grasp the angel hands that stretch out to you across the gray world of matterful spirit, and rise to the knowledge of growth and the heavens of burning light." Unquote. It is not difficult to imagine that Evelyn de Morgan and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, had they been contemporaries and had they met in Florence, they would have recognized in each other a kindred spirit. The poet would surely have immediately understood the Swedenborgian ideas that were the foundation of the painter's allegorical pictures. Likewise, the painter would have recognized the influence of Swedenborg in the depiction of the artist in Aurora Leigh. In this way, de Morgan may be seen to be an heir to the spiritualist tradition begun by Barrett Browning and her expatriate circle in Florence. Evelyn spent much time in Florence and Bellosguardo from an early age because her uncle, the artist John Rodham Spencer Stanhope, another Pre-Raphaelite artist whose daughter, as I said, is buried in Julius Cemetery, he had settled in Florence, and after the marriage of Evelyn and William, and because of William's health, the couple came to spend winters in Florence from 1890 until 1913. Evelyn routinely spent the week painting at her studio, but then each weekend would be spent at Spencer Stanhope's Villa Nuti in Bellosguardo. Today it's called Villa Lo Strozzino. And at this Villa Nuti, the interest in spiritualism persisted. When Lady Walburga Paget recalled the lively artistic colony that inhabited Bellosguardo, she exclaimed, and I quote, "What a galaxy of brilliant spirits on this small plot of ground." And in a condolence letter to Evelyn after William's death, an unidentified friend recalled vivid conversations on spiritual matters held with the De Morgans in the garden of the Villa Mercede, which was also located in Bellosguardo. Surely during those evenings, the late Victorians would have heard echoes of the lively conversations on these same matters that earlier Victorians had engaged in at the nearby Villa Bricchieri Colombi, the Villino Trollope, or Casa Guidi. This brief examination that I've just given of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Evelyn de Morgan has demonstrated how the lives of two creative women with links to the magical city of Florence were touched by their involvement with spiritualism and its practices. Attracted by the progressive notion of spiritual development envisioned by Emanuel Swedenborg, both the poet and painter incorporated these ideas into important works. While they remained skeptical of many of the claims made by spiritualists, it is likely that Elizabeth Barrett Browning would have agreed with Evelyn de Morgan's assertion in a letter to a close friend, Catherine Holliday, that, and I quote, "There are far too many well-accredited stories current for it to be possible to discard the belief that there are spiritual agencies surrounding us, and that some are susceptible to them and others not." What is also very important is that Barrett Browning and de Morgan, like many of their female contemporaries, found spiritualism to be a liberating influence on their lives and art. And for such progressive women, spiritualism was not only an individual existential quest for meaning, but also part of a larger desire to transform society as a whole. Spiritualism, in both its private and public practice, became a way for 19th century women to move beyond the limits once imposed on them. It broadened their horizons intellectually and politically, and ultimately contributed to changes that improved the social position of all women. I hope that I have made my point clear and that I have managed for you to connect what these two creative women who lived in Florence in the 19th century, although not during the same period, what they had in common, how it was connected to India, and how their spiritualist belief helped to change the political and social position of women. Thank you. If there are any questions, please ask them.
Thank you very much, Nick. Questions, comments? Anyone?
Comments. I love the way in this cemetery, these people are all connected.
Yes.
The spiritualists managed to get themselves all buried together. You've got Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Next to her, you have the tomb sculpted by John Rodham Spencer Stanhope for his daughter.
Yeah.
And then you have the Talks, and you have the Reverend Crossman. He was very much a part of the spiritualist circle, and Sylvestre, and all of their tombs are together in Sector B, while in Sector F, you've got Constance de Bourbel, whose daughter was very major as a secretary to Fanny Besant and so forth, who was very much instrumental in the movement to India of the Theosophists. Plus, we have connections with William Blake and the Talks, and also the Chicheses owned one of the most beautiful Blake illustrations of precisely the world of spiritualism. So it was very strong here. If you've seen La Dolce Vita of Fellini, there's this wonderful scene of these mad English people with their candles parading in the garden at night doing a spiritualist seance. Apparently it continued right up through the 1950s in Italy amongst the Anglo-Italians and so forth. Nick, thank you for that paper. And I'm just so sorry we didn't get the illustrations too.
Yeah. I could have a try now if there's still a bit of time.
I did not know about the acquaintance between Annie Besant and William Morris, by the way. I did not know they met each other, nor had I ever thought about the relation between suffrage and spiritualism. I had no idea. I was wondering at one point whether Ruskin ever delved into this. Does anyone know? Into spiritualism? Did he consider it? Did he?
It's been a long time since I've looked or thought about this, but he did briefly, if I remember right, look into it, particularly around the sort of the follow-on to Rose Latouche and trying to reach out to her. And there were a couple of friends who lived in a big house whose name escapes me, Emma might remember, who were sort of encouraging him towards this, but he eventually decided that it was not the path for him. Emma, do you remember more than that?
Sorry. Yes, I remember, Rachel, that we have an article by Van Akenberg, who wrote Ruskin, Lady Mount Temple and the Spiritualists. And this is, yes, as you have rightly said, Ruskin tried this way when he lost, when Rose Latouche died. And so he joined these groups and we got involved at that point. Also, when Rose died, he gave him in the forced letters, there are he writes about the symbolical sense that he gives to some objects that he received, and he thinks that it arrived from Rose Latouche somehow. But I think that the article to read, Arjun, is Van Akenberg, Ruskin, Mount Temple, a Lady Mount Temple, and the Spiritualists, because he reconstructs everything, all these episode. Yes, I don't think that it has been explored more than that. It doesn't seem to me. Maybe in the biographies, and Tim Hilton must have written about this, but I think it was a parenthesis. Ruskin did not, although of course we know he was on very good terms with Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and so he was friends with that particular circle of people. Yes, but I think that article is the one I know that explores this better. But thank you very much. It was fascinating, this all this paper, or this introduction on the spiritualists and their the connection with female cause, feminist cause,
which has certainly been a theme throughout this afternoon's talks. There's a description, very fine description by Sophia Peabody Hawthorne, meeting the Brownings at Casa Guidi with their child, and the strong argument. Robert Browning is so scoffing of Elizabeth's belief in spiritualism that she, in defiance, has sort of become more deeply involved in it. And then Sophia Eckley actually commissions their portraits, which are painted in the studio across the street from here by Michele Gordigiani, which are in the National Portrait Gallery. And then Elizabeth discovers that Sophia has been faking these events, the garland and so on, and is bitterly disappointed. I think partly because in that disappointment, her husband has even more power over her. This one sphere she had struggled to have of being able to be in contact with her dead brother and Margaret Fuller and so forth, that gets shattered. I did have to be on a committee for a student thesis here at the University of Florence on Lillian Whiting and the spiritualists. And I'm afraid I wasn't exactly sympathetic to the spiritualism, but she did do a very good piece of research on it, while at the same time believing it. And academically, I think that's a little difficult. Jun, how does this feel from your perspective?
Yeah, I have been thinking about it, and especially today in light of Peter's presentation, because I do feel how we think, how we behave as Indians, as an Indian society, it is very much spiritualistic. Mm-hmm. Perhaps not explicitly, but it is there always.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But I wonder what implications that has had as far as women's rights go, suffrage goes, what role it has played. I am not sure if anyone has studied that, but it does seem to be a very fascinating thing to do. Yes, I would love to read more about it, but certainly I can see some bulbs lighting up. There is a whole new thing coming up for me, it seems, with this.
I thought, sort of picking up on what you've been saying, Arjun, and some of the thoughts that were flitting in my mind while listening to you, Nick. Again, I think in part because whenever I think of Julia, I think of Julian of Norwich. And just thinking about how historically women have turned to aspects of spirituality in order to find independence and power and ability to carve out their own space and sort of enjoy living well in many ways. And it's really, I've never really thought about the spiritualists very much, but seeing how, again, a similar kind of thing happening with women through spirituality, finding a space, finding a voice. I thought that was really quite interesting.
Mhm. Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope, wrote a very fine paper on women theologians, pointing out that they didn't have the discipline of the academic seminarian training and so forth. And yet what they were writing was revealed theology, which wasn't happening with the male theologians who were being very academic and detached. And I'm intrigued by Arjun, who has been a nuclear physicist, training in science. And I loved Siram's paper where he was talking about this response to a text is from the soul, reading the Gita, reading Ruskin being read by Gandhi and so forth. This moment when the text becomes much more than just the normal reading, but really shapes the reader and so forth. And which we're not allowed to do exactly as academicians. We're meant to be the detached observer, but we're now finding that even in science, there is no such thing as a detached observer, that the observer changes the experiment.
And this is quite true. I think I first realized this when I was in the UK. I mentioned this last time as well, when I was first asked whether I was religious or not, by not understanding the question at all. And it is true. It seems that in the West, if you are a serious scientist, a serious academician, you cannot, you must not believe a lot of things.
I know, I got expelled from the academy because of the vocation. The two don't, they clash enormously. But I loved it when I was in St. Petersburg and the Russians came up to me, you know, there I was with the veil and so forth. And they were saying, and this had also been said by the Russian ambassador in Washington, we are not religious, but we are a spiritual people, was being said by the Russians. And that was before the, you know, the change from communism. But Julian of Norwich, there she is, writing splendid theology from the heart, from the soul, which also Therese of Lisieux, who's just a Norman peasant girl, writes. It's so profound. And this is what Francesca Alexander was finding. I love the story of Santa Zita. And on her feast day in Lucca, she's brought out in a glass coffin. And all of the citizens of Lucca spend the whole day with narcissi, which they touch the glass coffin with. And then they go around just joyfully over the whole city. I just couldn't believe it when I was there as part of it. And the Roma also make the pilgrimage to, I don't remember the name of the city, it's not Cluj, Yash, because their saint is Santa Parasheva, and she's brought out in a glass coffin. And they touch it with pieces of cotton wool, believing that they will be healed for the whole year. And if they can't make it to Romania, they touch my computer screen when she's brought out, really believing that she will heal them. And I just find myself living with the Roma because they're under my roof with me. They cook, they clean, we share everything. Their faith is so much more profound than mine, and it restores mine. I'm very grateful to them. And realizing how important it is when you have lost everything, you are in poverty, in the midst of injustice. You absolutely have to have this, which is also what Marx said. But he went on to say it's the consolation of the oppressed, and it is.
Nick, what about the images? Are you still working on those, or should we?
Yes, I tried to do a share screen, but it doesn't seem to work. But I was just about to say, I will send the text of my talk to Julia, and I will add the illustrations to it.
Excellent.
And then you can all see them there.
Right. Yes, we'll have the proceedings in both forms, the written form, CBX, HTML, and the oral and visual form from the recordings. And I think we have really managed to knit together a whole lot of material of value. And we did it without spending a penny. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you for organizing this.
Arjun.
To Arjun too, of course.
Yes, I'm sorry I made it just so little of it, although I've listened to most of last week's now, and I look forward to hearing, the bits that I missed from today in due course once they're up for us to see and now read too, Nick, which is good.
Do we have everyone's contact details as well on the proceedings page, Julia? Should anyone like to contact others? Can we share them with can we do a mailing list or something?
Do you want me to send out a list to everyone of their email addresses? No,
that could be.
I've been doing it BCC, but I can do one where it's CC. I'll do that.
Under UK, and I suspect European law, you're probably not allowed to do a CC unless every person has said they're happy for it to be CC'd.
I didn't know that.
Legally, it has to be. So you've been correct in doing the BCC because legally it has to be BCC until the people have said it's all right. So you could send an email to everybody saying, are you happy for us to share your emails? And if you do that, then absolutely you can do it. But otherwise, it's this thing where they need to write to you who has it. You then anyway, it just gets complicated. But legally, it needs to be.
Are you allowed to put the list in the body of the email?
I don't think so.
Not until you've checked to see that their emails are allowed to be shared.
Okay, right. I didn't know of such a rule.
It's one of the things we've been struggling with the guild, because we want to be sort of making connections, sharing friendships, but officially until somebody has said you are allowed to share my email with other people, we're not allowed to share them with others. And it's the case with all organizations now. So, and in theory, individuals too. But yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Yes.
Today and
both for organizing it. Again, well done for pulling it off on a shoestring and not having to spend a penny to do it, and yet pulling together a wonderful selection of voices and really interesting topics.
Good. And you can also browse on the YouTube for the Academia Bessarion, where we talk about a lot of these topics. We meet every first Tuesday of the month, 8 o'clock Florence time. And a lot of the people were my students and Princeton and so forth. And we still carry on these explorations with ideas and so forth. A bit radical. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we close now? And
have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
And you'll be doing the record.
Yes, I will be sending you the recording.